Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Adventures Travel Club television show. We find ourselves still in Egypt, and this is in Komombo at the temple, just off of the, well, I should say right on the Nile, actually. And we're just seeing here how these stones were put together and that there was, how these were carved, and they put a wooden piece in there to keep those all together. And Betty, of course, we're going to travel on down the, or up the Nile River, I guess I should say. But again, you know, these pillars that we're looking at, so many times, depending on what period that was or what kingdom it was, some of these represented like reeds that were tied together, you know, on the top, and others represented palm trees. And it was interesting as we traveled along because we could see so many of the different types of pillars. And, of course, then so many of them had, of course, all of the wonderful carvings on them as well.
Now you talk about reeds, and is it the reeds that the papyrus was made from? And so they had great use for that. That was how they used their paper and did all of their, not calligraphy, but their writings were on papyrus, if they weren't on stone.
If they weren't on stones like they are here. Of course, we see so many of them there. We're just about getting ready to leave this particular area, and you can see that a lot of the tour boats were right here because we were all going through this about the same time. But, you know, wherever you're going to find the tourists, of course, the other thing that you're going to find are things to buy.
Of course. And do you realize, Marv, that we do see all those boats out there, and that was just a small sampling of what they do have in the peak season, because we did not go during the peak season. So imagine what it would have been like.
Yeah. Yeah, there probably were a lot more people there.
But this was a fun place for shopping, as you say. They were, you know, it's like Jerusalem. It's like every place you go, they have their little stalls on the sides, and lady.
And that's when Betty says you want to take $1 bills because you can certainly bargain with those. You know, I thought it was interesting, Betty, that, you know, we had learned that the Egyptian women, not during today necessarily, but during the ancient times, wore a variety of jewelry. They had armlets and bracelets and earrings and necklaces and rings on their fingers and their toes.
Bells on their toes?
Well, I don't know about the bows, but yeah.
But we've seen those. In the Cairo Museum, we saw these magnificent necklaces and jewelry.
Well, and so many of those were decorated, you know, with cloisonné work, or they were inlaid with all sorts of turquoise and garnets and precious stones. Oh, it was beautiful.
Do you remember the necklace that I bought at the bazaar that we had all of the bead, the scarabs?
Yes,
with the beads and I haven't worn it, but on one of these days.
Well, in the ancient days in Egypt, women weren't only the wives of the men, but they were also their friends and companions. In fact, they appeared with their husbands in private company and also, you know, at public ceremonies. And by law, they possessed equal rights with men, and a woman could even, as we know, ascend the throne and become the sole ruler of Egypt.
Well, what happened, I wonder, to the civilization where it got to the point for so many, many years that with the men? We're just getting back into the fact we're getting back that we have some equality.
Well, the Egyptians certainly had it in those days.
Of course, that was a long time ago. It's not that way now.
What's that?
That the women have equal rights.
Oh, yeah. Remember the first trip to Egypt that we took? And the guy that was telling us about that, on how women did have equal rights, and if they ever wanted to get a divorce, there was community property. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but look how subdued they are. They wear the veil. They have to hide themselves from the rest of the people.
That doesn't mean anything about equality, though.
Doesn't it?
No,
it doesn't seem like doesn't seem like that's equality if you have to run around with a veil around your face.
Well, no, that's a religious situation, but that doesn't have anything to do with...
Is that just for modesty?
For equal rights, yeah. Women in that particular tradition is not, well, she doesn't, the tradition says that she does not want to be a temptation to other men, and so that's why she, well, you'll take a look today, how we have reverted to immodesty so many ways. I mean, just go to church sometime and see how people are dressed. You know, I mean, that's pretty immodest.
It's pretty bad. Well, I want to tell you, I think it's a great idea. I love the way they wrap their head around, and to me, it's so attractive. And I think, gosh, you don't have to get up in the morning and get the curling iron out. My gosh, you can hide a whole bunch of stuff underneath that.
But the other thing is here too, that you want to keep your head covered because that sun gets awfly hot in the middle of the day.
I'm just thinking of more of the aesthetic, how you just don't have.
Well, that's only in public though. I mean, when the women are are with their family and stuff like that, they don't cover like that, but they do just when they're out in public. But I want to get back to one other thing too that we talked about as we go down the river here, and because we've seen so many of these things that the pharaohs have built. But now you talk about equality. The pharaoh, you would think being the king and everything had so much equality, but this guy was a lonely guy because nobody could talk to him except members of his own family, a few of the royal servants, and so nobody could approach the king closely. And
why? Because he was the status of the god, and
that's
you don't
right.
speak
He
to
was
a god?
considered a god, and so an ordinary human being, if touched by the awful majesty of the god, his clothing or his shadow might suffer great harm.
Oh my! Well,
Isn't
of course,
that something?
yeah, but that isn't so great. I mean, he had so many concubines and so many people around him that he could converse personally with that I don't think he's going to suffer from that.
I don't know.
And he must have had advisors.
Not being a pharaoh, I would never know. But it says that from what I've read, that a mere mortal never spoke directly to the king, and there were many ways devised to avoid the direct reference to him. For instance, now the word pharaoh comes from Pera, which means the great house. Thus one referred to the house of the king rather than to the actual man himself.
Okay. Now, wait a minute. Let's think a little bit about our culture today.
Yeah.
Like the king or the queen of England right now.
Uh-huh.
You go up and speak to her? No way.
No.
She has people that you have to go through first.
Not
Our
unless-
president. Well, sometimes if he's out in public, you can say, hi, Prez. But if you really want to do business or something, you go through an intermediary. You can't just go into the office and say, hi, Bill, I'd like to discuss something with you today.
Not unless you got an appointment.
That's right. But you go through somebody.
Yeah, that's true. But evidently
Anyway, I
it was
just
a
wanted to
little
argue with you.
more closed, I guess, in that society.
Oh, I
there.
know. I'm just teasing
But
you.
Betty, as we go down the river too, we notice that we see a lot of livestock on the river, and from time to time, some people watering their animals, whatever. But in the days of the pharaoh, on the large estates, it was sometimes difficult for the owner to keep a record of the number of livestock that he had, because they were cared for by all sorts of herdsmen, and each one had the responsibility of only a few animals. So taking count of his herd, therefore, was a complicated task for the master, and it was generally performed on a day set aside for that purpose and that purpose only. So each herdsman, in turn, drove his cattle before the owner and his scribes, and then the scribes entered each new calf in the registry, and the owner checked to make certain that each animal was being cared for properly. Now, the other thing is, and what we heard earlier today in the show, is that they measured, the water as far as how you paid your taxes. So I suspect that the scribes then had to probably report this, for the master to the civil authorities to pay taxes on
Now,
how many head of cattle he had.
Did they brand these animals?
I don't know.
I wonder what they used for identification purposes. But as you were talking, I was thinking of the cattle roundups that they have in Texas and Montana, other places where they raise cattle on a large scale. So they sort of do the same thing, don't they? Not in the big cattle.
I think
round them up and go through and count.
Probably so. You'd do it by helicopter today, I suspect.
Well, but they still have to be counted,
Yep.
don't they?
Yep.
There's an accountability for all of the things, I
Right.
guess, that we do.
In the days of the pharaoh, the cattle were fed on grasses that were cut and dried just for that purpose. But before they butchered, then they again were confined, and they were force-fed by attendants who stood alongside them, and they stuffed food into the mouth of the cattle. I guess they wanted to fatten them up.
Yeah.
It sounds like today on some of those feeding lots, where they're just there for us to eat and fatten them up before the slaughter.
Isn't it in Japan where they take such good care of their beef?
The Kobe
where
beef?
Yeah, they massage them
Uh-huh.
and
And I think
they
that-
drink beer and oh man, and then it costs something like $15 a pound. Oh, probably more
Probably
than that.
more than that now, yeah.
pound.
I thought that this was kind of interesting because as we were going down the river, we saw something that you could have probably have seen, thousands of years ago. Here, these people were hand laborers. They were taking blocks and they were loading it into this barge. In fact, the rear end of the barge looks like it's pretty well loaded because it's sitting pretty low in the water. But, this has probably gone on for centuries and centuries. And again, we don't see anything as far as modern equipment or machinery at all. This is just all handwork.
Yeah, but that's just right here. I mean, they're pretty modern, Marv, in many of the other things, you know, the building of the dam and stuff, and they brought in so much. But this is tedious work, and,
Sure
and
is.
you can see, how would you get big equipment in to do that kind of work there?
Well,
it's
I think that-
shallow, and you would, I guess
think
you could
there's
use
a-
a dredge or something.
There's
But
probably, well, I think they're bringing it from dry land because it looked like some of the trucks brought it over there and then dumped it, and now they're putting it, you know, into the ship.
that's for erosion, huh? So that the Nile won't break
Well, I don't
down
know.
the
You know,
banks.
we see that along the banks. Yes, we see a lot of the. They built up the sides of the shore there with a lot of rocks. I suspect though that this is also used a lot for building materials too. So it might be going, you know, on up to Cairo or maybe to one of the other cities along the way. So you see, there is a roadway down there, so it probably was just dumped in there. And there, we've seen a few quarries on the way up
That's
the
right.
river as
But-
well too. In fact, so many of the things that were that we saw as far as the obelisks and things, all of those came from this area, and then in the upper area of Egypt. That then those were carved and those were taken down to places like Cairo, that type of thing.
Yeah, the Nile or any body of water is a great form of transportation, and that's why always people, when they settle someplace, they try to settle near water, because that is
First
their
big highway,
source not only of water for drinking, but for any kind of transportation that they need, whether to bring things in or to send things out.
Right. And you know, speaking about that on the river, it was the slaves and servants who kept the land moist and fertile with the waters of the Nile by cutting channels and raising dikes along the side of the river. And of course, we know that the Nile did flood from time to time, and so of course that brought all that silt down from the heart of Africa down into this land right here next to the river
That
itself.
rich soil, the loam.
Oh,
huh?
very much so.
That-
Yes. Yeah. You know, it was interesting to note that they did and still do raise grain, and they cut it and they tie it in sheaths, and once they were dried in the ancient days, they were carried by a donkey to a threshing floor, and cattle or goats and sometimes sheep were even driven round and round and round, and they tramped on the straw beneath their hoofs, and they separated the wheat from the straw. Then when the wind blew, the men tossed the straw up into the air, and the grain, being heavier, fell to the floor while the chaff blew off to the side.
It sounds like the Bible, separate the chaff from the wheat.
That's
huh?
right. That's
But we've
exactly
seen that
right.
here. That's been going on for thousands of years, actually. Because we still, up in the miners, up at the camp, we used to see the place where the donkeys went around to grind the wheat to make the flour.
In the swamplands of which we travel by from time to time here on the side of the river, that's where they cut the papyrus. You know, the men would go out in the small boats and they would cut it. And then on the dry land, they'd bring it back, and they would then strip it into very thin strips, and they'd lay them on a flat surface in 2 layers. The first layer of the fibers were laid vertically, and then the second layer horizontally, and they were bound together with glue, water, and pressure, and then the surface was kind of polished smooth. The papyrus sheets that were made that way were used for writing paper, either singly, or then they sometimes pasted them end to end, and then they rolled them into scrolls. Now, I remember once when we were in Cairo, we went to a papyrus factory.
Yeah,
Remember that?
mm-hmm.
And they also weighted it down. They put it in water and they weighted it down, and it was quite a process.
Hey, we were wrong then, because we're talking about papyrus being grown for the use of paper, to use it as paper for pictures or whatever. But we were talking about reeds. So reeds must have had a different purpose, Marv, rather than the use of being made woven or crushed
Well, I think
into paper.
I think the reeds are papyrus is a reed.
Well,
isn't
they
it?
would know, because they classified it as 2 different things, reeds and papyrus. I don't know.
I'm not sure.
It just dawned on me, though, that I do know that there is a papyrus plant.
Well,
but-
I thought that it was my thought was that it was a reed that was growing. In fact, I think on today's show, I think we actually
We'll have to
buy
go
some,
read
you know.
about it.
Yeah, we'll have to go read about it. Anyway, they did it. However, they did it. They did it. They did it well.
It was done. Okay.
We had talked about on former shows, you know, Betty, that the Egyptians, their thought about life and death. Well, the Egyptians in the ancient days did not think of death as the end of life, but rather as the beginning of a new life. And the Egyptian enjoyed life on earth and did not look forward to death as an escape from it, but he believed that when death came, a happy and successful life on earth could be continued in a new way into the next world. And the Egyptian thought of himself as having two indestructible souls. When he died, his Ba, or ghost, left his body in the form of a bird. The Ba was that part of a man's personality which after death could effectively maintain contact between his body in the tomb, the surviving family, and his Ka in another world. Now the Ka is the man's divine nature and vital force, and was born as his twin, and it stayed with him during his life and preceded him in death to arrange for his successful existence with the gods in the other world. Now, man did not automatically attain eternal blessedness. He must after death appear before a tribunal of gods where his good and is weighted, the good was weighted against the bad. I guess that's what I want to say. Only if the good did outweigh the bad could a man hope to enjoy the eternal blessings of death.
Hey, that's not far from Christianity. You
True.
know that. Only we don't think we have a Ba and a Ka. We think we have a soul, but the soul could also be a spirit.
Well, this is saying that they believe that they had two souls
I think
during
that's
those
wonderful.
days. Right.
Yeah.
It was essential that the Ba have a well-preserved body if it was to have the existence in the tomb. So if the Ba was going to be preserved intact, a man could eternally experience the pleasures of his life on earth. For men of rank, the mummification process took 70 to 80 days, as we learned before. And that, of course, which we have seen in other areas. Hey, now we have arrived in Aswan, and this, of course, is the southernmost place that we're going to go in Egypt, except when we fly over to Abu Simbel. But again, we can see the boats that are here on the side of the river, and there is also an island that we're going to see in just a little bit on the right-hand side. And Betty and I read a book, in fact, while we were in Egypt, about how when the Aswan Dam was built, of course, then Lake Nasser came into existence, and the Nubian people that lived to the south of here, had lived in this particular area, and also into the countries of the south. They then were moved out of that area because, of course, that all became one great big lake. And so a lot of the Nubians did move into this particular area of Aswan. And it was interesting to note, Betty, that they did not have a written language, but their language is of course, a spoken language. But they don't write it at all in the Nubian language.
Well, do you think that's changed, or do you think that
No, from what the guide said, that's
then,
still
it still is the same
today.
way.
Yeah.
Hmm?
Now on this island over here, Betty, there are about 2,000 of the Nubians that have settled on, and that island is actually rather small, but they're settled out through all this area. And I think in the book that you and I read, it was so interesting because the Nubians had built their houses pretty much out of mud. And what they did was then they would like whitewash that, and on the inside they would make little insets in there that would hold vessels and hold clothing and all sorts of things like that. That was very, very. There's the island over there that we can see, and as we say, there's just about 2,000 of the Nubian people that.
Let me tell you another thing that they did. It just brought back to memory when you talked about before they had been moved out of their dwellings. They used to buy, I guess they brought them from Cairo. I don't know where they got them from, England. They had plastic shoes, and they had set this like in Japan. You don't wear your shoes inside your
Indoors,
house. So the Nubians, they would slip on the plastic shoes when they went out to go into the sand. They were barefoot in their homes. They kept their homes immaculate.
That's what I understand.
Immaculate.
They were immaculate.
But these shoes were the little sandals. When they'd go out into the sand, which really surrounded them, then the sand would leak through the plastic sandals, and they'll rinse them in the water, and then they're clean, and they last almost forever. So they were
very clever.
Yeah.
Very clever. They were doing a lot of building here in Aswan. We see there's a new mosque going up here, and then there's also a brand new Christian cathedral from the Coptic rite that is building that there. So a lot of building going on.
And they're not small.
No, they're not small at all.
Ah.
Well, there's a big population that does live here in Aswan. You know, Betty, we're trying to figure out in our minds how some of this history goes on, and it is a little difficult to try and keep track of, because according to what I have read, there is something like, there were 31 dynasties.
Now, you didn't read all about the 31 dynasties.
No, I just
You
read that
just
there
read
were
that there
31
were.
dynasties.
I was going to say, Marv, when did you find the time? You're so
no,
busy.
no. Over here on our left-hand side, there is a 800-year-old cemetery. There's a Muslim cemetery there, and we'll get some other shots of it a little bit later on, not in today's show, but in another one, I believe. And then they have opened up, or they were just opening up while we were there. Over here on the right-hand side, there was a museum of Nubian history. And when we get a chance to go back, I think that would be very interesting to go see, huh?
Oh, yes. In fact, I would like to give the title of that book again that we refer
go
to
ahead.
a lot, you
Yeah.
know, because I really think that our viewers would get so much out of it. It reinforces kind of what they're looking at here, but it's told from such a wonderful viewpoint, and it's called A View of the Nile, and it's about a story of an American family in Egypt. Her last name is Fernea.
It's a good book, so
Elizabeth
get it.
Fernea.
I explained before in Karnak how to make it, how to put it on its granite pedestal, and finally, or before that, the way to transport it, because they had to put it on a big boat. While working 1400 BC, they left it, but they could separate it on both sides. You can see two standing up near its top. The next step they had to do to cut underneath on both sides. If they began with the top part to the left, every 1 or 2 meters they had to put a big piece of wood or a stem of tree till the whole obelisk became on them. Pulling it on a ram till the river, placing it on a boat and sailing down river till Luxor. 1100 tons, that obelisk in front of you. Around 137 feet long. Supposed to be the heaviest one and the longest one if they finished it. If you walk that way you can, and then you turn to the right, look at some up there, you can walk on it as one doing, or 2, 3 are doing. You will see the cracks, that's why it was left. If you do, please don't cause any more cracks.
Well, I see that Betty had the stamina to go up over there and take a look at that, but I was... somebody
had
asked
the
me, said,
camera.
are you going over there? And by that time it was a little bit warm and the camera was a little bit hot to the touch. So I said, only mad dogs and Englishmen go out.
So you can't put me in that category. I'm an Irishman, but I went. But you know what? It
There
was,
you are.
yeah, you kind of. I'm not walking very fast though. Look at that. Oh man, Monsignor's there. He went with me, but. You know, you kind of want to see as much as you can see when you're there to see it. That's what
Of
you
course.
pays your money
Right.
for. You know,
That's
I
right.
don't want to miss out on anything.
Well, that was quite an obelisk, though, and people were standing on it, but I don't think they caused any more cracks on that. They were walking up and down that. Anyway, that was really great to see. Now we are at the Aswan Airport, and we are going to take a flight over to Abu Simbel. And I have to say, Betty, now this is we're getting very close to Abu Simbel right here, but we flew for probably about 45 minutes or so over there. And I'm sorry that I didn't have the camera going when we were over other parts of the lake, but that Lake Nasser goes for as far as you can possibly see. That is one big body of water. I mean, I was totally amazed. And what you're seeing here is not a true representation, but we're getting very close to Abu Simbel, and I wanted to see if I could get some shots here so we could actually see the statuary from there, or where it is.
Yeah, but look at how that river foraged. Look at what happened. All the indentations, trying to find new avenues of escape.
Mm-hmm.
The river does has such force and it can do tremendous damage as well as being good for the country.
Well,
too,
it certainly did before they built the high dam there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And on other programs, we're going to go take a look. In fact, we will be driving across the dam, and some interesting things to see there too. But now we're kind of looking down at the area where I think the Abu Simbel is. Anyway, we landed, got into an air-conditioned bus, thank goodness, and because this was just a wee
It was
tad
warm.
Yes, it was. It wasn't warm; it was hot, but. anyway, it's a dry heat, so you can stand it. You can see now off in the middle of the picture, that's where the back of the mountain is, where the figures are. And of course, as we're going to learn in the next program, these would have been lost when the dam was built and the lake came into existence, because it would have covered all this. So the wonderful job that they did, and actually they cut the whole thing up and then moved it up out of there. And the mountain that they built is the back of it's really a phony mountain, because you can walk inside and it's a dome-like thing.
But you know, Marv, that was built, all of this undertaking took place through the generosity of UNESCO.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just Egyptians could never have afforded it, but
it was. Yeah, you're right. It was an international effort.
So it was
for everyone to
truly
do.
an international effort, and they had submitted bids from so many of the countries. These marvelous engineers that came up with such unique ways of transporting it, and then they finally had to come down, which we'll talk about when we get to the dam. The one that they did choose to transport all these magnificent figures down the Nile, up the Nile.
Do you remember, Betty, at all when on the trip, whether any of the guides stated that some of those things there may still be some that are in the water? I mean, that they didn't get everything, not from this particular area, but from some of the other areas?
No, I don't. I'm sure they didn't get them all, because they're omnipresent, and so they took the ones that they felt were the most significant and worth for posterity.
This would also be nice. This is all lit too, so this would be a beautiful thing to see at night. And there we go. Boy, I have been waiting so long.
See that? Now look at that. And that's like Marv says, that's a man-made mountain that these are all resting against.
Right. And but the actual figures and the backing right there, that's the original. The original figures and the original sandstone.
Even the word colossal is doesn't do justice. I mean, it
doesn't. These are so grand, and again, it's living that whole thing out on National Geographic, isn't it? It's just wonderful.
We took some pictures of us standing like there at the base of the feet, and when you look at them, and sometimes you think,
You're
well,
dwarfed.
I'm pretty good or something, and man, you are nothing.
These are baboons sculptures up on top, and that they didn't last, or the erosion kind of got to them a little bit, but that's what they are, and we'll learn more about that too in the next show.
Beautiful faces, though, aren't they?
Very much so.
Really, truly beautiful people.
And you can see how colossal, as the word that you just used, Betty, that these actually are, because there's carvings of all sorts of different heights here, and it is marvelous. And this is just a portion of it. There are two particular areas here. Again, as we say, we'll see in the next show and get an explanation on that. But it's just about time for us to go. So if you're interested in any of the trips that Betty has coming up, like to get on our mailing list, give her a call at
488-7443.
That does it for this time. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.